Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Real EFL Preview Show, the show where we pick three big matches from across the EFL to analyse every week, apart from when we pick Barrow. My name is Gary Hutchinson, and fear not, this week we're pandering to our US viewers and talking about Wrexham. Well, it would be wrong not to after they were knocked down a peg or two last night, delighting 71 other EFL clubs. As always, before we get going, please remember to like this video and subscribe. They're two things I say every week, and let's make it a hat trick of things I say every week, because I am welcoming in our regular pundit, Mr. EFL himself, Kyle Keneally, to help me with today's show. How are you doing, Kyle?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I said just previously, I feel like I've been cheating on the EFL a bit this week. I've been at two Premier League games in midweek, and I was at Sheffield United Leeds on Monday night, which may be a Championship game at the moment, but I think it is certain that at least one of them clubs in Leeds United will be in the Premier League next season. I think, to the surprise of no one, if Sheffield United were to follow them, whether they finish second or whether they go up via the playoffs. But I am back watching EFL football. On Friday night, it's Sheffield Wednesday versus Sunderland, and Lincoln are at Barnsley on Saturday, which is just round the corner from Sheffield, which always makes it a nice local away day.
So literally all of your games this week have been either Premier League teams, future Premier League teams, or former Premier League teams, apart from Lincoln.
Yes, yeah, that is correct. That seems weird to say. I think it'll be a while until we'll be able to say that Lincoln have been in the Premier League, to be honest. At Crewe particularly, but yeah, that is true. I didn't actually think about that, but yeah, that is right.
There we go. Sheffield Wednesday and Sunderland, what a huge game that is. Two clubs who both really think that they probably should be a little bit higher than they are. And, you know, Sunderland have been there very recently, but Sheffield Wednesday club, a man of a certain age like me will always remember as FA Cup semi-finalists nearly every year. At one point, they were finishing high in the first division. David Hurst and Mel Sterland and Roland Nilsson, and they had a great side. So yeah, it would be really nice to see Sheffield Wednesday climbing the divisions. Another team who have climbed the divisions before, and I believe once were even knocking on the door of the Premier League, are Tranmere Rovers. They are knocking on the door of the top flight once again, but the top flight of the non-league setup, because they're really struggling in League Two. And this is where we start our analysis. Every week, we obviously pick three games to go through, but there always seems to be a dismissal or a sacking or a manager removed from his post. Nigel Adkins, by mutual consent this week, which usually means we don't want to say we've sacked him because he's a nice guy, but he's gone anyway. Comes 2 weeks, I think, after he was backed by Mark Palios at Tranmere. What were your initial thoughts to this, Kyle?
Well, he may be a nice guy, but I think this is probably his last job in English management for probably the rest of his life, really. At the moment, he does seem like I don't want to say a dated manager. It seems quite harsh to say something like that, but he has got a Tranmere side that are right on the edge of the relegation zone in League Two. They are just 2 points above Morecambe. They are 1 win from 14, so this had been coming. And I think the surprise was that it wasn't earlier, perhaps even towards the back end of 2024. They've lost 4 of their 6 games this month. 1 win in 2025, which came against one of the 2 clubs that are below them at the moment, and that is bottom side Carlisle United. And they did beat Morecambe, though I think that was also in January, which was seen as a big win at the time, but it did not progress them any further up the table, and they remain in massive, massive trouble. And if the 2 clubs below them were in slightly better positions, and that is obviously an obvious thing to say, but if they were perhaps better off the field, Carlisle have had a nightmare couple of years, and Morecambe have struggled as well in the last few years, then Tranmere perhaps would be in a much worse position. And I think they have now a 5-point gap to the teams above them in the table. So it does really seem like it will be 2 teams from 3 to drop into the National League this year. And at current form, Tranmere certainly have to be considered to be one of them clubs. As I say, 2 points separating them and Morecambe.
Yeah, Tranmere obviously with a recent history in the National League, tussled with Lincoln City, who It may surprise people, given my backdrop, to know that I support. So it's easy to forget that despite actually being a relatively big club, and they're a club that could probably compete in the Championship if they had the right backing and the right players. They do have that recent history in non-league. They have been a club that have dipped down there. They struggled when they were promoted to League One, and they feel a little bit to me like Grimsby Town, who have yo-yoed between the National League and the Football League. Now Grimsby are on the up at the moment because they appointed David Artell. Solid appointment, did a really, really good job at Crewe. Was dismissed, I think, when it was believed he'd taken them as far as they can, and now obviously they're in League Two. More on Crewe later. That's called foreshadowing for those who do not know. So David Artell was the right appointment for Grimsby at the time. Who's the right appointment for Tranmere Rovers now?
Well, I think top of the list, obviously, at the moment is Ryan Lowe. That seems like a massively out there name. He's a manager that's been in the Championship a lot more recently. I think he's been linked to Championship jobs, and his own sort of admission, I think, is looking for a Championship job at current. He is from Liverpool, which gives it that sort of advantage. Obviously, Tranmere not been, I think they say Birkenhead rather than Liverpool as such, but he's obviously that local area. It would be an amazing appointment. As I say, he is the favourite at the moment. The managerial odds don't often always translate to the actual appointments. It's not as cut and dry as that. But I think if you're looking a lot more realistically, Mickey Mellon is a name that rings a bell. Obviously, he played over 200 games for Tranmere. He's managed them twice. I think he took them into League One with back-to-back promotions. He's current manager of Oldham, and he's actually managed against Tranmere this season. Oldham knocked Tranmere out of the FA Cup earlier on in the season. I don't know though whether he would fancy another chance at Tranmere. To be honest, that would make it his 5th stint at the club. But obviously, the name that's always linked when Tranmere appear to be looking for a manager. But there are plenty of other names on the list as well. But it is an appointment that they have to get right. And I seem to find myself saying this all the time. But in a season where if they fall out of League Two, as clubs often do, and obviously there's a lot of talk at the moment about 3 up, 3 down. If they were to fall out, and whilst it just does stand at 2 clubs up, 2 clubs down, I think they would be stuck there for a little bit of time. Clubs often struggle to bounce back. You see teams that come up from the National League to League Two, they tend to do really, really well. I think there's been very few, if any, teams in recent times that have been relegated once they've got promoted, whereas the other way around is a lot harder. So this appointment feels absolutely huge for Tranmere's season.
Yeah, I mean, Sutton and Hartlepool obviously spring to mind almost straight away as teams that didn't go straight down, but only lasted the season. But you're quite right. Teams like Harrogate and Bromley, for instance, have made a real good fist of staying in the Football League. So if you were to ask the same question to me, which you won't, but I will answer it anyway. At this stage last season, I would actually have picked Mark Kennedy because one thing he did understand was how to defend and make games very dour, and at the moment every point's going to count. However, after his awful stint at Swindon Town, I wouldn't dare back him for any job in the Football League, and Tranmere would be committing, I think, PR suicide if they brought Mark Kennedy in after he almost took Swindon into a relegation battle and was saved by Ian Holloway. However, I do think a club like Tranmere have a huge amount of potential. It feels a little bit like Swansea we were talking about last week, with if you get the right manager in there and they can stay up this season, there is massive potential at Tranmere. They are one of the biggest clubs in League Two. And with that in mind, I'm going to pick a man who is not particularly local. I think 35 miles down the road from Salford, quite how we would do going into Merseyside, Birkenhead, whatever you want to call it. But Michael Appleton. I think Michael Appleton is a solid manager. I think the issue he's had in recent years is taking jobs on that have been a poison chalice. Going into Blackpool when they're in the Championship, it was always going to be really tough to keep them in there. Going into Charlton's just a tough job anyway. Nathan Jones is the first manager in about 6 or 7 that's done absolutely anything at all. I think Michael Appleton is the sort of manager who could go into a club of Tranmere's size and affect real change through the youth system and through just generally improving the play style, get the fans back on board, all that sort of thing. Is he the man to bring in on the 27th of February in a relegation battle? No, the only man there is Neil Warnock, but I don't think that he's going to go into Tranmere. So we shall see. It could, of course, be Mickey Mellon. as you quite rightly said. He knows the club, and he's had more stints at Tranmere than Darren Ferguson's had at Peterborough. And that's pretty crazy, because Ferguson's had more stints at Peterborough than I've had sitting in my lounge watching television. He literally goes to Peterborough more often than I go in my own lounge. Now, we're talking about Michael Appleton as a potential Tranmere Rovers manager. He has, of course, quite famously, been Blackburn Rovers manager. It was for a very short period of time. I think it was 50 or 60 days, if I remember correctly. Blackburn, a team who once won the Premier League, so fit the remit of a team you can go and watch, Kyle, as a former Premier League side. They are hoping this year to become a current Premier League side. They are 6th in the table. They face Norwich City this week, who are 10th in the table. Just 4 points separate the two. The battle for those playoff places in the Championship and that lucrative £200 million spot in the Premier League really beginning to heat up. Blackburn suffered a huge blow losing John Eustace, who was a superb manager for them earlier in the season. But Valérien Ismaël, and I hope I've pronounced that right, has just been confirmed as their manager. So what do you make of that appointment, Kyle? And can he be the man who finally guides them into the playoffs and potentially back to the Premier League?
Yeah, so firstly, I'd just like to pick up on the point I think you said there about obviously Blackburn are a former Premier League winner, but I feel like they're obviously a massive underdog in this playoff race. They just stayed up by the skin of their teeth, really, towards the end of last season. But yeah, as you say, John Eustace has done a really, really good job. And interestingly, their next game after Norwich is at Derby, and Blackburn have a sellout away end waiting. I'm sure that'll be an interesting day all round for everyone involved in Derby versus Blackburn. But yeah, as I say, they'd obviously massively overachieved this season, and they've done really well, and they still are in the playoffs. And even them couple of games when there was speculation surrounding Eustace and he was out of the dugout for one of their midweek games, and then he'd obviously gone to Derby, and then they were out without a manager. For the Saturday game, they won both of them, which makes it even more surprising at the weekend when they lost 3-0 against Swansea. Luke Williams had obviously just lost his job there. There's perhaps a bit of new manager bounce on show for Swansea beating Blackburn 3-0. But I really like this appointment. He's a manager that's done really well, and he's thrived off an underdog before. He was at Barnsley. Barnsley just stayed up in the Championship, and he took them into the playoffs. A massive achievement. I don't think that can be understated in any way. To take a club of Barnsley now in League One and have been trying to get back into the Championship for a couple of seasons, but to take them again, another former top flight club, to the edge of the Premier League is absolutely huge. He's managed a couple of other clubs in England as well. He was obviously at Watford. There's been plenty of managers that have been at Watford, obviously in the past, as everyone knows. He was at West Brom as well. Two slightly, feels a bit harsh saying unsuccessful. It didn't work out, perhaps as he would have intended. His coaching career has been fairly long. I think he's been managing for well over a decade. He's been in Germany with Wolfsburg, with Nuremberg. He led last to their best ever season, 17 points from their first 8 games. And he led them into Champions League playoffs for the first ever time. And he was managing in the Europa League. So he's obviously a manager that has done really, really well in the past. So I feel this is a really, really big game. He has a decent sort of start as well on paper. Obviously, this is a tough first game to come into. A team like Norwich, who are obviously challenging for the top 6. Blackburn just have that 1 point gap to Coventry at the moment, who obviously really turned around their fortunes since Frank Lampard has come in. With that game against Derby, they've got games against Stoke, Cardiff and Portsmouth, which feel games that are really, really winnable on paper at least. So it should give them a good chance of, if not maintaining their top 6 place, at least being in the race for it. And they, as I think I mentioned last week, they play Sheffield United on the final day, which is a game that looks certainly their hardest at the moment. So they've obviously played Leeds twice, and they've given Leeds a real test so far this season. I think they beat them and drew to them, and they've obviously played their East Lancashire rivals, Burnley, twice. So that game against Sheffield United is certainly the toughest test for the rest of the season, and falling on the final day feels really, really crucial, particularly given the implications on the playoff race it could have and on the automatic promotion race. But yeah, as I say, a really, really good appointment, I feel.
Excellent. Now, Norwich City, 10th in the Championship, they certainly have some testing games coming up, just looking down their fixture list, West Brom, Burnley, Sunderland. So they've got some tough ones coming up. Now, early in the season, it was all about Borja Sainz. He seems to have tailed off a little bit now, and all of a sudden it's Josh Sargent, the US striker who I think came over from Germany. How important is he to Norwich reaching their seasonal ambitions, which one would assume would be finishing in the top 6?
Yes, I think that is certainly the case at the moment. I think even the most optimistic Norwich fan would obviously say there is no chance of top 2. That goes without saying, obviously, at this point in the season. It does feel, though, that they have to win this game, or at least not lose to Blackburn on Saturday, because going 7 points behind with only 11 games left and the teams you've just mentioned to play would feel like season over for Norwich. And with so many teams packed into this playoff race for them final 2 spots, which it does feel like it is the case with the clubs clear in Burnley and in Sunderland at the moment, so far clear of the rest. That it does feel like it will just be the 2 final spots in the Championship for the taking at the moment. Josh Sargent has been really instrumental since he's come back from injury. He's only played 20 games this season, but he's got 11 goals and got 5 assists. And Norwich had a good start to the season. I think they were in the top 6 during sort of the early parts, and they got struck by a massive injury crisis, which really ruined their season. I think I watched them against Sheffield Wednesday in November when they lost to the Owls, and Wednesday aren't particularly great at home, in all honesty, throughout the course of the season. But Norwich, as I say, were decimated that day in terms of their squad, but they do seem to have responded a little bit. It hasn't been the greatest of February's, though, and that's why they are still 4 points adrift. There was a good 4-2 win against Stoke last time outside and scoring twice in that game. And then he had one of a win against Watford, a team who have really dropped off at the moment. A couple of draws in there and a loss against Preston. They lost the top 2 in January. Obviously, that's Sheffield United and Leeds, both by 2-0. But their other 3 league games were all wins against Luton, Coventry, and that 5-1 thrashing of Swansea. As I say, Josh Sargent is in excellent form as well at the moment. I did the preview for the Real EFL website, and I backed him to score. Unfortunately, the last time that I backed him to score was the game against Preston, which is the only game they haven't scored in for a fair amount of time. So I'm hoping that is not giving them some bad luck. Keeping this playoff race as open as possible would make for a great end to the season, and hopefully for Norwich at least, they can go to Ewood Park on Saturday and get a result. But Blackburn have the joy of the new manager bounce potentially on show on Saturday.
Well, I always backed Borja Sainz in the EFL Fantasy League, and every time I did, he either didn't score or got taken off. So I know all about cursing Norwich City strikers. Norwich City fans, you'll be glad to know this week, I haven't backed anybody from your side. I also haven't backed anybody from Wrexham or Bolton, and that's where we go now. Now, I've got a little smile on my face. I'm not actually anti-Wrexham particularly. I don't think that they, up until the transfer window, particularly tried to outspend anyone. Their wage budget was already huge from coming out of League Two and outspending everybody, but that's by the by. However, it has been a little bit sickly, the Wrexham Birmingham loving. Before the season started, there was talk of them taking that game over to be played in America because there is, I don't know, there's some American connected to Wrexham. His name's never often mentioned in any headlines. I can't think who it is. Well, he's actually Canadian, isn't he? But obviously it's the American market. So last night, even as a Lincoln City fan, I can't believe I'm smiling at this, but Wrexham were 2-0 up in the EFL Trophy semi-final. They were going to set up a final for Birmingham with Birmingham City, which I think was going to be played over in America, although somebody would have suggested it. Alas, Peterborough United came back, scored twice and then won on penalties, and me celebrating a Peterborough win is utterly crazy. Can Wrexham respond from that, though, Kyle, and keep the pressure up on the top 2, or have the wheels come off the Hollywood bus?
I'd just like to start on that final goal. So obviously, as I said, I was at an unnamed Premier League game last night. I'm not going to reveal where I was because this is an EFL podcast and we only talk about the EFL. But I checked the score and I saw that they were 2-0 up at half time, and then obviously I've seen the final goal, which does have a hint of irony. If you listen very, very carefully, the Wrexham fans are singing "Que Sera, Sera" as the goal literally goes in, which feels like a song that should never be sung. And I've sung it before, by the way, at times that it shouldn't have been. But it is the worst thing possible to happen, and then to go out on penalties. I've said for a long while, and again, this is not bitter in the slightest. I haven't massively watched Wrexham. I was at Wrexham away with Lincoln earlier in the season. A game that I felt, despite only having one shot on target, I think we had 14 shots that day, and should have certainly got something out of the game. And the only goal was an own goal, and a very unfortunate own goal at that. I'm not going to say I'm not massively impressed with Wrexham, because that would be a biased thing, I think, to say. But I am surprised that they are where they are in the table. And I know for a long while that the stats had backed that up. But you have to say they've come through some games that could have potentially caused some challenges this month. They've edged past Mansfield, Northampton and Crawley. They did lose against Leyton Orient at home, which is now a couple of losses this year. And the racecourse is usually a ground which over the years, at least since the takeover, has become a ground where they very, very rarely lose and even concede. They don't concede massively at home. It is as much a fortress as anywhere in the country, probably just as much or ever so slightly less than St Andrews is for Birmingham. There is obviously the small matter of Birmingham against Wycombe on Saturday, which I'm sure Wrexham will be very keenly watching, because any slip up from Wycombe would mean that Wrexham can really put pressure on the automatic promotion places. They have got a tough march, though. They've got Huddersfield on Tuesday evening. Terriers obviously hit a little bit of a bump in form at the moment. They've got trips to Reading and a game against Wycombe in mid-March, a game that hasn't been selected for TV coverage, which I was slightly surprised at. Birmingham versus Wycombe has on Saturday. And they also play old, not rivals as such, but they've obviously been involved in some really good games over the years. Stockport towards the end of the next month. All games that should be really, really key. And if Wrexham are going to go up, they're going to have to get some results from them games. But it's a really, really difficult game they face on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, so two things. First of all, I hope they're not watching Birmingham Wycombe too closely, because they also kick off at 12:30. And if they are, they're not going to be concentrating on their own game, Kyle. And secondly, I had to pick up on this. You know the whole Que Sera song? Do you know what the and Wycombe fans, this is of interest to you as well. So the first time I heard that, it was actually to the tune of Que Sera, and the song went, and I will sing it. It was 1988, May the 5th, I think, when Lincoln beat Wycombe for the second time in the GM Vauxhall Conference to get promoted. And the song went, "Tell me, man, to put the champagne on ice. We've beaten Wycombe twice." So that was how it went. And I even put a post-it note on my screen to remind me to say that. So that's in my singing voice. That's beautiful. So a team that expected to be in the top six at this stage of the season, currently not in the top six, are the Trotters, but Stephen Schumacher has really picked up where Ian Evatt was intending to leave off. They're now only outside the playoff places on goal difference. How do you rate their chances of, first of all, finishing in the playoffs, and secondly, winning promotion?
Well, the playoffs have caused them some issues over the last couple of years. So I think even to make the playoffs this season would be a minor achievement. Obviously, Bolton were back to challenge for promotion, probably be in the top two spots realistically, which is obviously one of the reasons that Ian Evatt had lost his job last month. But Stephen Schumacher has come in and done a good job so far. He's only managed the 4 games, but they've won 3 of them. Losing his first game against Reading, a late penalty, obviously didn't have a massive impact on that first game, but they've won every game since. They've all been narrow wins, really. A thriller against Crawley, 4-3 that's ended up, and then they've edged past Shrewsbury and Leyton Orient. All them games, no mean feat, because they've all still got realistic ambitions of either, in Shrewsbury and Crawley's case, staying up, and Leyton Orient of finishing inside the playoffs. And obviously that result against Leyton Orient for Bolton means they are now level on points. And this is another really, really tough game for them. Bolton were knocked out of the EFL Trophy against Wrexham early this month. So it is a chance of minor revenge. Obviously, if this was the case towards the end of the season, if this was one of the results that got them into the playoffs, and if they were to beat Wrexham, or at least get promoted at their expense, then I think it would be certain. I forgot what the word is there, what I'm trying to say. I know what I'm trying to say. certain revenge. Sorry, that's the right word. I had a miniature brain fart for a minute there. It would be certain revenge for that EFL Trophy defeat, and obviously Wrexham haven't even made it to Wembley in the end, so it is obviously not the end of the world for that. But yeah, I do fancy Bolton to get a result of the weekend, and if they can, I do think they have a good chance of finishing the playoffs. It's just getting over the line this time, and that's what they've struggled to in the last couple of years. They've had the playoff games against Barnsley, a team that I don't think will probably be in the playoffs this time around, which will be happy to see. And if they are, then it will probably be at Bolton's expense, given the way the table is currently lining up. So yeah, I think Bolton should finish inside the top six, given the rest of the season, if they can keep up this winning run.
Yeah, now a team that would absolutely love to be in the League Two playoffs this season are Crewe Alexandra. We did mention them a little bit earlier on the show. They're 7th at the moment, so they are just tucked in there. And they go this weekend to Chesterfield, who are 14th. Now, that is not going to be acceptable for Chesterfield. They've certainly pumped some money into their team since coming up. They, I think, expected to go through League Two, as Wrexham and Stockport had. They were very much the third wheel in the Wrexham and Stockport story. Chesterfield were the kind of the unlucky losers. They've got a couple of games in hand on the top 7, but they are 10 points behind now, aren't they? Can they make an unlikely push in their final 15 games, Kyle?
Well, when I started looking at this game, I had a look at obviously them games in hand and thought, well, there is an outside chance. You've got to win them games, but they've just won 2 in 10. So to win 2 games in hand seems a bit of a stretch at the moment. I think it'd be a minor miracle to make the playoffs. And given they've faced Notts County, I think they've got a game against Colchester as well in midweek. 2 really, really tough games coming up. They have to be on top form at the moment. And they have shown their ability, though, to beat teams who are pushing for promotion. I think I said a couple of weeks ago, that game against Doncaster when they won 5-2, absolutely huge. It felt at the time. But it's consecutive defeats since to Swindon and Walsall that feel like they've killed off all hopes. And they've 3 losses in 4 across February. The only other game in that time was a 1-0 loss to Cheltenham. They'd finished January with a 3-0 win over Bromley, but a couple of draws beforehand and a defeat to Chesterfield there. They did not lose to Chesterfield. They lost to MK Dons. Chesterfield obviously can't lose against themselves. And they lost the 2 games over Christmas, which feels like a period of the season that really killed them off. And as I say, these back-to-back defeats at the moment means it is likely to be a mid-table finish, which for most promoted teams would feel fairly respectable. But as you say, I think they expected to be knocking on the door of the playoffs at the very least this season, and particularly with their January transfer window, they would have expected that. So it does feel a little bit disappointing that they won't be involved in the playoff conversation. At least that is my opinion for the moment, unless anything drastically changes in the final few months of the season.
Now, last season's beaten playoff finalists were Crewe Alexandra. They are back in the playoff positions, but their form remains inconsistent. Do you think that they can hold off the 2 sides in touching distance at the moment?
Yeah, well, obviously one of them sides are Grimsby, that I think Crewe were drawn against over the last month. 3 of their 5 games, though, this month, Crewe have finished 3-0. They've had 2 losses to Newport and Wimbledon, both coming in back-to-back games, but they did win their last game against Barrow by the same scoreline. They've had a couple of other draws over the month. They're back-to-back wins to start January against Carlisle and Bromley, scoring 7 across them too. And it felt like a bit of a turning point at that point. They're a team that had fluctuated with the automatic promotion places at the start of the season, but with the form of AFC Wimbledon, Bradford, Doncaster at the moment, that seems very, very unlikely that they will be pushing for the top 3. They won only 1 other game, actually, in the rest of January against Morecambe. And since the 20th of December, they sit 14th in the table. If the table had started from that point, they've won just 4 out of their last 14. It's a 6 draws, though, in that time. So it's more a failure to win games than losing. There are only 4 losses in that time. That feels like it's holding them back at the moment, but they are going to have to start turning draws into wins again if they're going to hold off the teams that are currently challenging them for a top 7 place.
So are they going to get there or not, Kyle? You seem to sit on the fence a little bit there. It's just a simple yes or no, isn't it, mate? I mean,
I do a lot, don't I? I will back them to finish in the top 7. I think they will just hold off the challengers.
And of course, any EFL fantasy football fan will know that Crewe have been a godsend this season with Mickey Demetriou, who was a points machine earlier in the season while he was fit, alongside the likes of Will Amerson and Paudie O'Connor and Carl Piergiani. All names that, footballers, apart from Paudie O'Connor, obviously, who's like the Irish Bobby Moore, but all the others are footballers who perhaps you wouldn't mark as top notch, and they were the first names on the team sheet. You forget your championship players. I want Mickey Demetriou. Aaron O'Connor is another one, I think, at Harrogate. Brilliant. Yeah. Get them clearances in, boys. Right, Kyle. Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us this week. We will see you again next week once you've been to as many EFL games as a man can humanly go to. So thank you very much. And just to wrap up, thank you everybody for watching. Last week's video is already on 728 views. Doubt it'll go any further because the games have been played, but it's really nice to be reaching an audience. Please do help us reach a wider audience. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like the video. And if you do really like it, why not share it on social media so that we can reach a wider audience? I wish all of you, all of your EFL teams the very best of luck, unless you're Barnsley, Wrexham, Grimsby, Peterborough, Stevenage. There's a long list, actually. So unless you're a Lincoln fan, I hope you lose at the weekend, and we'll see you all again next week. Thanks a lot. Cheers.